Everyone, Mr. Silbaugh here, and this lesson will talk about the lesson writing process in writing the middle of your lesson plan. And this is for my Intro to Education class. So, in the last lesson, we talked about how you write your opening of your lesson plan. And your lesson plan is the part where you get your students engaged and excited to learn about what you're going to be talking about. You can use it to review what you talked about in the previous lesson and kind of give some teasers into what's coming up. The middle of your plan is your actual lesson. This is where your students are going to be learning something and completing the work that you give. Typically, the middle part is the longest part of your lesson plan. It usually has a lot more detail. So in the middle part, even though there's three parts to it, it essentially is very long. You're going to see why and why I encourage you to write longer. So the first part is the instruction, which is the presentation of content. This is where you actually introduce all of the material. Then you have practice and feedback, and then you have student involvement. So in the instruction part, this is where you actually teach, okay? This is where you show new content, you introduce things to your students, and it's really the overall main focus of your lesson. You're essentially answering the question, what are you teaching, and how are you teaching it? Are you going to do a larger lesson here, or are you going to do a smaller lesson? You're going to do small groups, and if you do small groups, who's going to be in each group? Will you lecture or have students watch something? There's a lot of questions you got to answer here when you're planning your instruction out. You would specify exactly step by step what is going to occur in the lesson. So this is the longest part of the lesson, and you actually spend time going through it. All right, so I need to make this note about the planning steps. When you're making your plans, you need to be specific, and that involves you writing out. And when I say you need to be as detailed as possible, you need to be even more detailed. The reason why is because when you're writing your lesson plan, you have to write it so that someone other than yourself could potentially take over and do the lesson. The reason why, and the reason why this is encouraged, is because in the event that, let's say, you have an emergency and you're going to be out of your classroom, you need to write it step by step as if someone else who isn't you could follow your instructions. So the more detail you put into it, the more they are able to follow your plan. You have to assume that the person who may be in charge of your classroom, like a substitute, may not know what you do in your classroom, or may not know how to do the lesson that you provided. Like if you're doing a lesson on fractions, the substitute teacher in your room may not know how to do the fractions. It may be a very big review for them. So when you are writing your lesson plans, you need to write them as if someone else was completing them, and that's why you need to be as detailed as possible. And the way that you would do that is you would write them in steps. When I wrote my lesson plans, when I was first learning how to do it, now that I've done it, I don't write as detailed of plans, but when I was first starting, I wrote extremely detailed plans and wrote it step by step. First, the teacher will do this, and then the teacher will do this. And you can either number them or whatever you want. You just need to make sure that you are being as detailed and as specific as possible, because you want to make sure that whoever is leading your classroom, either if it's you or someone else, will be able to follow your plans step by step of how it would go. Next section is the practice and feedback section. So after you've taught your lesson, you're going to turn it over to the students to give them time to practice. This could be an activity that you guide or a worksheet that you're working on with them, so on and so forth. There's a lot of different options you can do here. You may give them time to work on it by themselves, or you may work through it with them. The whole goal there, though, is that you give them time to practice and then you give them immediate feedback. What immediate feedback does that look like? So if you do give them a worksheet, you may go over it with them. Be like, Johnny, solve problem number 1. Susie, solve problem number 2. And then they'll solve the problems, show their work, and you could say, oh, that's great, or no, let's try again. That's immediate feedback. When we say immediate feedback, we mean they get the answer and response directly, and there is like no delay in it. They get the correct answer and the correct way to do it then and there. That's why it's called immediate feedback. Immediate feedback is very important in your lesson plan because when students are learning a new topic, they need to be able to get that correct or incorrect right away so they know how to do it when they're independent. Student involvement is the next part of the middle part, and this is where you allow students to practice on their own. This is essentially independent work time. And again, it could be an activity, it could be a worksheet, whatever you have. There's multiple ways to do this so that the students are getting time to practice. This time around, though, you are not giving them immediate feedback. You would take this as a grade or something of that nature where you can see if they've actually mastered the content. During this time, the teacher's walking around the room and monitoring the students, making sure they're on task, giving feedback, answering questions if they arise. The teacher here in this part is essentially the guide. Okay, and this is usually the part where it's a little bit shorter of the middle, because remember, the actual teaching part, you're giving step-by-step directions. In the student involvement part, you might say, students will receive worksheet 1-1, and the teacher will monitor the room, walk around, answer questions, and assist where necessary. You also would put times in these sections too. I forgot to mention that as well. When you are doing this, you want to plan out how long it's going to take each section, because as a teacher, you do have certain amounts of time. So in conclusion here, the middle part is the core part of your instruction. It needs to be the most detailed and the most needs to have step-by-step instructions. This is the part where you actually teach the new content and you also allow the students to practice what they've taught. All right, that's going to do it for this part.